Okay, council, we've got a couple of things on the agenda this evening.
I need this.
Thank you. We do have committee reports, which have been bunched together. We have two committee reports back to back. Okay. 2014-44 is a first reading. It should be a second reading. Why does it say first? It does say first. It's a second on the other. Right, it's a second reading. Are we still talking about this? Is there any motion to suspend the rules?
Which one? 44?
Correct.
Yes, I handed out a sheet, I'm sorry, I don't, and this kind of outlines my concern regarding this proposed ordinance. As you can see, it's going to greatly affect our residents who work outside the city. As of right now, the way it currently stands, the max anyone will ever pay is 2.5% total out of their income. That's both the city in which they work and Maple Heights will only add up to 2.5%. Well, if we change the credit to only 25% instead of 100, most residents will be paying over 4% of their income. So most residents who work outside the city will be seeing a 1.5% or more increase to their income taxes. So 1.5% or more will be taken out of their paycheck all after this goes into effect. To me, that sounds like an awful lot.
Any other comments on this? And again, I'd like to know if you want to pass it tonight, continue to discuss it. Alex, go ahead.
I'd like my name removed from 2014-44 as co-sponsor. Sorry.
Any other comments?
After the discussion that Bill and Arlene had, there was a little, one or the other was off. And I didn't understand it. So thank you for this, Bill. That's a little better. So what I'd like for you to do, Jackie, is to put this into the council meeting as a whole for further discussion. I asked Kathy to get more information, which she's been doing. And and we can make a better decision at that time.
Just to, I don't want to interrupt you, but I heard Blair the other night say that if we decided to adjust this from 25 to 50 or 75%, it would have to be go back on first reading. Was that correct?
If it's a substantial change,
Right.
it's determined to be a substantial change. Generally speaking, the substantial change would be a change that would make it more burdensome on your taxpayers rather than less burdensome on your taxpayers. So the substantial change is when you go from 100% to 25. If you were going from 100% to 50, you're actually making it better, and that would be scrutinized differently.
All right, thank you.
I did.
Go ahead.
I want to pass this out. This is information we were waiting for from Rita. Mr. Thornburg sent this to me. And the percent is not 4%. It's still slightly less. It's 3.875. I mean, almost 4, but it's not 4. That's representative.
Go ahead, Alice.
See, now, we just got this, and I'm still making the same proposal. I asked you, you said you would put this on the agenda for a council meeting of the whole for discussion. And I'm asking you to do that, so we can have further discussions on this, because I really want to know what I'm asking the residents for.
Okay. I have no problem with the rest of council is as concerned as Councilman Adams. So, but it is on second reading for tonight. And the first committee of the whole that we have is the Wednesday, June 25th, which is the amended appropriations and the tax budget. I think we can combine those two, hopefully, but we will have to get moving on this.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Jackson?
I appreciate the information from both sources. I agree we need to hurry to do something, but until somebody comes up with another way to increase income, I don't know, I don't see I don't know what it is about any proposal to increase income being people totally against it, unless the $2 million in debt that we're in doesn't mean anything, or they want to live in a city where that $2 million in debt and not having any income and having these less employees and not having any services is what the person wants for the norm. I don't think the residents want that. But again, I will say this again, that if we had an overall plan that addressed everything, not just one thing at a time and trying to get that to pass, but have a comprehensive plan with multiple ways and multiple taxes to increase a little bit, along with everybody, police, fire, labor, non-labor, and council taking a reduction to make those things work out, I think would be a better overall plan than just one little thing at a time. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to, there's no other comment? Okay. Okay, moving on to 214-45, this is the Ohio Voter Bill of Rights statewide. And is there any reason not to pass this, or do we want to have a first reading?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'd like to have a name added to that. And I don't see why we can't pass that tonight.
Can't.
That's okay. Yes.
Moving on to 214-46 is amending resolution 213-55 and directing the finance director to transfer all existing and future funds assessed and collected for garbage into a special fund, into a general fund out of the special fund. This is on the first reading. Do we have any comments on this?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Jackson?
I think I understand the proponents and opponents of this. I think I guess the first thing is the correct wording and the definition of what this is. Is it a fund? Is it an assessment that only supposed to be used for one thing or not? I also think that the amount that we need to collect for garbage when that comes in, I think that should be only used for trash, and any overages then should go to the general fund.
Irene, would you like to answer partially any questions that Mr. Jackson has brought up?
Yeah, I can address, I hope I addressed it you asked. The information that I have, and just discussing also with my peers in other communities, the waste collection is general fund monies. I mean, I talked with Garfield and others surrounding, and also from the suburbs communities I worked in. It was not a special fund. I sent out an email giving the definition of a special fund, maybe where the confusion is at, by putting it in the general fund, it's not all in one pot. If you know that in the general fund, you still can segregate that money out. I mean, for example, we have a police fund within the general fund department. We have a fire, you name it. I mean, they're all under the general fund as a category, or umbrella, but they each have their own accounting. So that's different from a special fund, just so you can see, because you can still, in the general fund, you still can account separately for the waste. You can assign, you do that by assigning categories. You give it a separate account number for income, you give it a separate account number for the expenditure. So at any given time, you can look at that account number to say. The only reason that I had some thoughts about that is because being in fiscal watch, these special funds, they stand out, and as the gentleman said at the traffic presentation, you sort of handcuff yourself. I mean, once you put it there, then you have no flexibility in terms of what you can do. And, you know, it's just the city's operations, because technically, although it may be intangible, there's still support that goes to that from the staff. I mean, you know, there's calls that come into the city that the secretary has to answer. So we could still charge, I mean, legitimately overhead to that fund. I'm just explaining how a fund works. Because when the calls come in about waste collection, where do they come? To City Hall. They don't go to waste management or to the county. So, but having said all that, I don't know if there's just some confusion in the accounting, which means you do not have to have a special fund just to segregate dollars. Because just like, for example, council, you have your own fund and designation, but it's under the general fund, but you still can account for your expenditures separately. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out, in my advisory position, the definition of a special fund, how it's to be established, and how it's to be used. So that was my purpose in doing this, because I felt that it would be amiss for me not to explain to you what a general special fund is or how to use it. It may not have been an audit exception in the past, but that does not mean it won't be. And under fiscal watch, everything will be under scrutiny, where in the past, when the audits come, we need to understand that they do not perform what they call a performance audit, which means they look at every transaction, every fund. And if you look in the letters from the auditors, they say, you know, it's not to detect fraud, or they don't, you know, it's a random audit. But when you get into like fiscal watch, you know, then everything is subject to review, more scrutiny. And I don't know what the state, I'm not here to speak for the state. Like I said, I'm just giving my advice. But I do know that one of the things that's required is that there has to be approval from the state for this. I don't know, I wasn't here when the fund was set up. So I'm just saying that they can go back and slap you with some things, because they're gonna be looking for everything, so.
Thank you. Any other comments here? Yes.
Irene,
Yes, sir.
we have a deficit, but we had a deficit with waste management about how much?
Well, waste management, it's not that it was a deficit, it's just that the bills hadn't been paid. It was more of a cash flow issue than a deficit. And setting that aside doesn't necessarily make the cash flow issue disappear. It says, somebody say it gets into real technical accounting. So you can have it on the books that you have the revenue, you have the expense, you have the surplus. But the other side, as I tried to explain when we were doing the budget, you can't just look at that and isolate. You have to also look at cash flow when you're deciding, you know, what you're doing.
Yeah, but when we came up with Owen Waste Management, now we're making payments. We receive payments from the county through the taxes, property taxes, to pay for waste management. To me, fire, police, and garbage, in that order, is the most important things in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And here we end up with $1 million close to Owen Waste Management. If they would have said no more garbage pickup till the bill was paid, we wouldn't have the money to pay them. So I'd like to know where that money went. You have a negative cash flow, and then you take the money out of the waste management from the taxes that was collected and used it somewhere else. Not saying you wasn't here. So that money was transferred to be used for other sources, correct? Wasn't paid for waste management.
Well, I wouldn't say it quite like that. It wasn't transferred to use for something else. Like I said, you have a bank account, you have monies, and you write checks. So all I'm saying is that it didn't necessarily say it was this money, that money. It's a cash flow issue. I can't tell you where it went. Hopefully the audit would tell us that, when they do the 2013 audit, which we're working on. And I don't know how far back. I would have to go way back to see at which point that, they had a deficit or what have you. I mean, that's, you have to go back to all your audit reports to see if there was any mention of that. But I guess what I'm saying is that there's two measurements. You got a cash measurement, and then you also have an appropriation measurement in terms of the fiscal watch. And having a special fund, it sits out there for appropriation where you can see if there's a deficit. That's all I'm saying. It just sits out there by itself, as well as the other funds.
So if we look at the resolution 47, it's directly contradicting the whole idea of the 46.
Now, if we,
Do you see it that way?
I mean, the way it's written here, yes, it's saying that it wants to keep it like it is, the existing situation. And then I'm just saying, if that's the case, then there may be special accounting that we'll have to do to keep the fund from going into a deficit. The general fund would have to technically, on the books, loan money through legislation, and then when the money comes in, the money will get transferred back to the general fund through legislation. So, I mean, it can be done. It's just that it just requires a different type of accounting.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackson?
add something that make information be cleared up. And that is, how often do we get the money from the county? And how often do we pay waste management? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it per half? Because it's sometime during the year when waste management bill comes in. If we pay it, we're gonna pay it. If we don't pay it for another whatever period of time, then we're behind. So what are those two schedules? When the money comes in from the county, how often do we pay waste management? What's the contract rating on payment to them?
The money comes in from the county every 6 months. It comes in every 6 months after the January collection, which is usually March, and after the July collection, which is usually September. That's when the assessments collected will be given to the city. Waste management bills monthly. So every month they're expecting payment, whether or not you get the money from the county. And it may reconcile itself in 6 months, but in the meantime, I mean,
Right.
we can do, I guess, maybe that's what happened, I don't know, maybe that's what happened this time.
Any
But
other discussion on the either 46 or I guess let's finish 46. We can keep that on as the first reading while you ponder it. Yea or nay? Okay, then 2014-47, as you've heard the explanation, it's the exact opposite. So this also should be a first reading.
Madam Chair.
More discussion, go ahead, Anthony.
Well, I just wanted to say, the reason why I introduced this is the fund and the payments will stay the same as we've been doing it. It's mainly to keep it that way, and then anything extra to go into the general fund needs to be presented before council. That's what I'm asking, is to keep the accounting the same, and if there's $300,000 left over, if you want to transfer it to the fund and we're fine with waste management, then we can go ahead and do that. That's basically what this is. That's what I'm asking.
Go ahead.
The issue of overages or remaining balances in Fund 251 is actually already handled in section 1060 of our codified ordinances, because there outlines that year to year, we are to adjust the amount of the assessment. So if there is a large amount that builds up, you would then calculate, so you would reduce the amount that each resident pays so that it would be self-balancing. So you wouldn't end up with a lot, or you wouldn't end up with a negative balance. So that issue of overages is actually already handled by the provisions that are already outlined in our codified ordinances. So I don't see that being an issue, and I think that the way that it stands is the right way to do it.
And thank you. Any other comments? Ken?
Just one last comment, if I
Yes,
may.
go right ahead.
I think the closest way we can look at this, like I say, from other municipalities, this is a revenue account also. It doesn't say that it has to break even. If you look at like the building permits and the different charges from the building department, for example, all of the money that's collected for the building permits and inspections do not go to municipal, the company that we contract. I mean, if there's excess, then it benefits the general fund. And I'm just saying that this is most similar to that. That I don't know where it says that it has to break even, or that if there's any excess funds, that it cannot be used to support the general fund. And like I say, I think that's a close example, because if that's the case, you maybe should set up a special fund for that. So all the monies that come in for building permits and housing inspection and all of that, if it did not go back to municipal, building, then, so to me, it's the same. And that's in the general fund.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll put both of these on first reading and have a more thoughtful discussion on that. 2014-48 is also in first reading. Expenditures over 1,000. If you not look at, if you look at now, do you have any questions? Pardon me?
First reading.
First reading.
Madam Chair, we could
Yes.
put that in committee, committee of the whole. We could discuss the council rules since we didn't do that on the last.
We're going to have a big, huge agenda for the meeting morning coming up, so I think we'll just have to let it go until we have another meeting. We need to get over the hump with the taxes and really important ordinances, so I have no problem letting this ride a little bit. Okay. No questions? Okay. Okay. I also, before we adjourn up here, I also had a phone call this morning from the auditor's office, the young person that we worked with. I can't remember.
Nita.
Say it again?
Nita
Nita, I don't remember her.
Nita Hendricks.
Hendricks, right. We met with her in January, she and a maid, and she volunteered to come up and meet one-on-one with the whole council to talk about possible plans and the direction, et cetera, and wondered whether you would be at all interested in meeting with her. She would like to do it within the month of July. I'm just going to make it very heavy duty on that. That's up to you. I told her I would schedule something if you were at all interested.
Madam President,
Yes.
John Barnes, and the auditor, is supposed to be in tomorrow night. He sent a email saying that if we wanted to meet with him and discuss anything, maybe he would meet us at 6:15 before the public meeting.
And you
I
think that
guess we
would,
can have two of them.
that's up to you. Why don't we wait if you feel that it would be worthwhile to have her come up and meet with us
Yeah, we can
just
take-
as a council rather
take it.
than, in a community forum setting? We can do that. Just let me know what you think, because it would have to be pretty much scheduled at some point in time.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
any additional health information should be open to everybody. So I would be very open to listening to what she has to say.
Good. Okay, any other issues, announcements? Okay, we're good to go.